Hello, and welcome to this hands-on learning session. I'm Aileen Rizzo at the AIMS Center, and I'm joined with my colleague, Beverly Ford.
Hi, everyone.
Here at the AIMS Center, we are committed to a more equitable world through math and science education. And you can learn more about our work at our website, aimscenter.org. And along the way today, we invite you to communicate with us through the chat feature. Make sure that your settings are on panelists and attendees, so we can be sure to all see the messages and communicate clearly. All right, so today's activities we are going to talk about today, exploring and gathering information through playful interactions using stories and some sort of building material. So we asked you today to bring some sort of building material, a lot of choice that you have of what you can use. Today, we're going to be using DUPLOs, but we invite you to use maybe Legos or blocks, even anything that you might want to build with. So Bev, can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to be doing today?
Yeah, I would love to. So stories are such a great place to foster imagination with kids, whether they like listening to stories or maybe they talk a lot and they like to tell stories. Stories can be a great place for kids to have imagination. Well, so is Lego building. And so we were thinking, what if we put the two together? Because then you've got kids that really just love the story, getting into the building with the blocks and stuff because of the story. And then you have kids that love the blocks that maybe are getting into storytelling a little bit more. So today we're going to be looking at a few things. We're going to be kind of having some themes throughout the webinar that we'll be kind of speaking to. One of them comes from, if you've been with us before, we've talked about the principles of early STEM. And the first one is adults can come alongside children and make connections and really help them build with the STEM concepts. Kids really do need us. And so we need to understand that we play this really valuable role. So that's kind of our main principle for early STEM that we're going to be looking at, but there's actually 4 of them. So the second one is our adult beliefs impact student beliefs. So if we believe we can't do math, guess what? Those kids are they're gonna feed off of that. So we want to really believe it, that everyone can do STEM and that we can do it too. So our attitude really does matter. And then the third one is that STEAM education is not culturally neutral, right? So we recognize that, culture and context, that really matters and it's happening in those spaces, but they don't always recognize that. So, and then the fourth one is voice, that children should have a variety of ways to communicate. And today is a perfect example of that one too, when you think about them building or telling stories, but really, Aileen and I wanted to kind of pick one as our theme for today. So impact and just how that adult guidance can play in. And so that goes into our second part, which is guided play. So play is learning. We are learning things when we play. And so But guided play is when an adult comes alongside a child and they ask them prompts and questions, or maybe they play alongside and kids are curious about what the adult or the person is doing, and then they ask questions. So that's one of the things that we're going to be seeing kind of throughout and talking about in our webinar today.
Yeah, and the second piece there is about collecting data, or really about what you're noticing. So what's really important in these playful experiences is to realize that sometimes kids tense up, I think adults do too, when we feel like we're being tested or things are very formal where we have to perform. But play is a setting where you feel a lot more relaxed, a lot more willing to try things that you maybe haven't tried before. And children are the same, they love play. And so think about play as a way for you to collect data on what a child is doing. How are they counting? How are they organizing? And we'll go through some of those specific questions later on, but we just want to think about how this informal setting of play and using stories or narratives can just help relax a child a little bit better and show us a little bit more about what they can do.
Definitely. And today we encourage you to look for the STEAM, right? So science, technology, engineering, art, and math is going to be happening. And there's lots of different examples of that. So we just want you to kind of put those STEAM lenses on and be looking for that, especially spatial play, which is kind of that root foundation that kind of feeds into all of the STEAM fields. So that's just something for you to be keeping your eyes out and open for. So we're going to use stories today to inspire STEAM moments and foster comprehension and conversation while playing with some kind of material, blocks or bricks. We would love for you to build alongside us. So take a moment to go grab something to build with, because it's way more fun to play than to just watch us. And while you're doing that, I'm going to read for you a really fun book that I love that's called Where's the Ladybug? All right, so here's our book. Where's the ladybug? Where's the caterpillar? Here it is. Where's the bee? Here it is. You can see lots of spatial things happening here as the bee is behind the flower or maybe on top of the stem. Where's the snail? Here it is. Maybe next to the tree. Where's the ladybug? Here it is. And where are you? There you are.
So that's a great story that young children can explore and read, and we'll give an example of what that looks like in just reflecting on that. But I just want to let everyone know in the chat, I just put a prompt. What are some of your favorite stories that either you like to read in your class or to your children, or you remember from when you were little and you were read to? So feel free to share that in the chat while we continue with our session.
Awesome. So thinking about the stories, there's lots of different opportunities to do different STEAM things. And one of them was just counting. There's lots of different counting opportunities. So I'm going to move my camera to my hand so you can see. I've got some Legos here. These are my Legos. And one of the things that I noticed that, and I have a little ladybug here because, you know, play is always more fun when you can interact with your imagination, is that there was some flowers in the story. So I'm going to build for myself a little flower here. I'm going to call these yellow blocks my petals, and I'm going to put my ladybug right next to my flower. So it would be fun to even be like, well, where's the ladybug? I think you could interact with that story using the ladybug and something that the child builds. And that to me is what can be really fun and for the kids to just use their imagination. So one of the things, so there's lots of counting opportunities, just even in like the circles that they're seeing on the DUPLOs. Also, you can look at just how many Legos, maybe how many green Legos or yellow Legos, or just even asking the kids what they want to count. So obviously with the flowers, that was one of the things that I noticed. But one of the things that kids often do is they like to do lots of the same thing. So here's one flower, but I noticed in the picture there was multiple flowers. Well, let's say I wanted to build another flower, and this time I'm going to build a purple flower. Well, now I have two flowers and I built them the exact same. So this is an example of multiplicity. When you're iterating or when you are repeating something, like this is like the stamp, like, you know, in multiplication, we say like a group of three, and then you repeat it again exactly. Now that's beginning to understand kind of in a spatial way, multiplicity. So now I've got two flowers for the ladybug to fly around and play with. So I could even build another flower if I wanted to for the ladybug. And again, you know, it's that idea that when you're building multiples of something, that's that foundation of multiplicative thinking for kids. And another great place to do that is when you think about family members, right? So I remember setting the table with my daughter when she was like 4 years old, and we were just talking about how many forks we needed and how many plates that we needed. So those are just everyday things that I don't think we always realize are those opportunities for kids to interact kind of with multiplicity.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lot of stories that really lead into this ways. I know when we first thought about this session, we talked about Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and how there are sets there as well that we could think about. And so there's some people that are sharing their stories, some that I'm familiar with, some not familiar with in the chat. So we really want to invite you to keep sharing, but also maybe to think of some stories that have some counting opportunities, multiplicity opportunities that you can bring out through building.
Yeah, I know Tacky the Penguin was one of my favorite stories when I was teaching in the classroom. And there's such a fun setting that's happening with Tacky the Penguin. And he does, from what I can recall, some silly things. And so kids find so much joy in telling stories like that. So finding something in that book that they might want to build with Legos and then interact with. I mean, you can even print, you know, if you want to print like a Tacky the Penguin model, they could have them interacting in the blocks or the Legos area. And again, it just kind of makes a story come alive, but it also kind of puts some ownership on kids to build and think about how those different objects in their stories are made. I had to think about, like, here's my flower here, right? I had to think about how long of a stem I want, or tall of a stem I wanted to make, and how was I going to do my petals? Well, when I'm thinking about that, I'm taking that object and I'm kind of decomposing it, or breaking it down into different parts. And that's one of those, I think, foundational STEAM things, is that ability to kind of think in both parts and then the whole thing. So there's really, and then the story, the kids are already excited about it, or you're excited, and kids feed off of your own excitement. If maybe you have a favorite book that you like, I think they feed off of that as well.
That's so true. So we're going to take a little play break, just a really short one, because we want to give you a chance to reflect on your own story, maybe a story you're thinking about. But if you want to use the one that Bev just read, you know, feel completely free to do that. You hopefully have some building material. And so this is your prompt here. So build something from your favorite story that can show multiplicity or counting. We love for you to share those on social media and tag us at Ames EDU, but as well as maybe you want to describe what you built and what story it went into, you can put that in the chat very easily and share that with us. So we'll take just a few more minutes here just to have a little play break and give everybody a chance to reflect on that story in these ways. All right. Well, call us all back. Thank you for exploring with us. I hope you did some fun building along with your story. And I just wanted to say that the stories that the authors have written for us, that we have in forms of books or digital stories, are so great. We always enjoy those, where those are stories we remember from when we were little, books that we've rebought and given to our children, or books that we read in the classroom. But stories come in other ways. They come in the stories sometimes that we're told, like, grandma sharing a story about when she was little, or even you sharing a story about a wonderful day or a memory that you had about a birthday, just something fun. But stories can be really simple. They can be about just our real life experiences. And stories like that are simple ways that children can explore sequencing. And sequencing is ordering in a way that makes sense of what it means when you say after, before, or in between. And children have to build that concept of what that means. That's a concept they need for mathematics, but also for storytelling, right? And as they try to follow directions. So when we think about the ways that we can become familiar with these just, experiences that we have and then reflect on them, we can intentionally use those for children to maybe explore sequencing as one of the ways that they can do it. So Bev and I were discussing like different things, like, say, what did you do when you get up in the morning? So like Bev, want to share, like, what do you do first thing in the morning, like getting ready, or maybe, people have their routines of what they do.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Well, I definitely I run. So I got up this morning and ran. And then after I ran, I sat down at the table and had some breakfast. I don't skip meals because I like food. And then I brushed my teeth and I came into work. Obviously, there was a few other things in the midst of that. But when I think about like building something from my story today, before I came into work would probably be like maybe the table that I was sitting down at, or I don't think it would be a little tricky to build my eggs on toast, that's one of my favorite breakfast foods, but like the table or maybe even the bed. I got out of bed. I got in my car because I actually drove to run with a friend so I could drive a car. But what I love about this example and sequencing is I'm having to imagine what I did this morning. And it was a while ago. A few things have happened since then. And that's such a powerful moment of visualization. And that is another important skill when we think about STEAM learning. But we need purposeful reasons. Well, now there's a purposeful reason. My friend just asked me what I did this morning. So it's working that muscle out. That's so important. So I think I'm going to build a table for today since I had some breakfast at the table today.
All right. So that's great. And I think that also shows not only the value of all of our shared experiences, so as Bev is building, but also to give children an idea of like that first, second, the order of things. We're trying to teach them routines a lot. Many of you are getting ready to teach a new group of children, maybe routines as you get ready to start your classes this fall. And routines are really important. Children are secure in routines when they know what's coming next. And I think that that's one way that they can make sense of the words that we use when we say before, after, or in between. So Bev's building her table. Looks great.
I even built my chair so that I have a place to sit at the table. It was interesting. When I first started, I was just building with these 2x2 blocks, but then I realized I couldn't really get underneath it. And if I, was having some fun with a toy like a ladybug that's going to go sit at the table, they would need to have a space for that. So I mean, that's one of the things that I think kids have the opportunity to think about. Like when you push your chair in at the table, like it needs to fit underneath the table. And that was just something that I noticed. So I built my table a little taller. So there's 2 legs that I had done. And then I used 2 4x2 bricks kind of for the top of it.
Yes, that's great. And this leads us to a different thing that we wanted to talk about. Not only in sequencing can we use through stories, but we also can use substitution in our building. And substitution is, an algebraic foundation in algebraic thinking and operations, but we can introduce this to young children because they actually really do that on their own. They're usually creative and innovative about things they use to problem solve. And I love how Bev mentioned, like, she had to change up her build to problem solve what she wanted it to be at the end, or some way that she wanted it to function. Another way we can use substitution, if we're using blocks or bricks or Legos, we can talk about how we can interchange pieces and still conserve the actual build. So if I gave a prompt, for example, in this case, and said, build another table, but let's use some different pieces to build it, and see how the children will see that there's still equality between these pieces, even though they're using different ones, maybe smaller ones or larger pieces.
Right. So I put right here, see how we have the 2x2s here next to the rectangle, and how I put them next to each other. I think even just realizing that, I mean, maybe having a child have some 2x2s and some 2x4s and seeing how that kind of fills out, or they could even put it on top to kind of show that sameness. Sometimes you have to literally experience that. And I think that can be really powerful for kids. And what I love about bricks is, like, we do kind of have to have a substitution. When I was building my chair over here, at first I was like, oh, well, that's not, I mean, I need to make it bigger. But I realized if I just put another small brick in front of it, they wouldn't be connected in any way. And I wanted that connection. So then, these 2x2s, they don't work for me anymore. They don't fit my purpose. So I had to get a 4x2 so that it would stay together. And that, I think, is a really kind of interesting natural thing that happens when you're brick building. You might have kids kind of leaving it off the edge. There, that's a little easier to see. But I feel like, their focus would be maybe what they're seeing from the top, and they're not really worried about what's hiding underneath there. And they're wanting to make it look and create it similar to what they're experiencing in the world. So, but if I was to build a table, I know that I need to get one of those little center blocks. I had done 2 of them, and then starting to put these little blocks around the edge might be a little bit harder for kids than this one big one. But part of that experience is the problem solving that's happening for kids in that moment. And we want those opportunities for them because it's meaningful, because they're getting to play. And they could even say things like, look, my tabletop is blue, white, purple, and green. Well, mine's pink and red, and just even naming the colors and kind of highlighting those differences if they don't have a count yet. But then you can ask questions like, well, how many bricks did you use to build your tabletop? And they might just count the top ones. They might also count those. But again, it's not about right or wrong answers in play. It's just about paying attention to what they're noticing from it.
And kids naturally want to kind of mirror some of the play that they see in us. Like if we play a game with them, they usually want to trade roles and mirror it back. So this is one opportunity to maybe make a table and tell a little story of like how you ate breakfast at the table, and then say, can you make a table like mine? See, and see if they could let's just use 4 colors instead of 2. I only use 2 at the top. And so these prompts and these ways that children can play side by side with us or in small groups with us can just leverage some of those things that we notice about what they're doing, what details they're paying attention to, and then tells us as teachers and parents where we can take them next.
Right. I even wonder too, because I noticed, sometimes what's most obvious for us as an adult, being able to know that I need to take this brick and put it on the edge, that may or may not be super obvious to kids. But even just, being able to suggest, well, can you let me turn this, if this was my table, and I could say, well, let me turn my table upside down. Can I show you what it looks like, before I put my table leg on? So letting them see those visuals so that they could try to match that, with bricks themselves. and some kids maybe are paying attention to color a lot, so they're going to want to try to match the color. And that's such a teachable moment to be like, it's okay if it's not the same color. They might still want it the same color, but that tells you a lot about them too. So we're learning about our students no matter what they're saying in those moments. But whether you're asking them to kind of move the blocks upside down or right side up, I just think all those moments are telling you so much as a teacher about what kids notice. You could even have like chairs around a table and say you can put how many family members or how many people live in your home and sit at the table. So can you build a chair for each person? Now, again, the child is thinking about the people in their home and they're having to count that and create that. So those are just really great connections between, their everyday life and counting and being able to, again, substitute. We talked about that today. So I think we're ready for a play break, Aileen. What do you think?
Yes, let's have another play break.
Okay, all right. So for this play break, what we want you to do is we want you to think of something that happened this summer. So something that happened from your summertime, and then you can show maybe an example of substitution, or you can think about sequencing. You could maybe build two objects of things that happened, and first I did this, then I did that. But just somehow be thinking about those themes of substitution and sequencing while you're building something. And don't forget to let us know in the chat what you're building and how it's going. And you can also share pictures as well on our social media. So let's play.
All right, so we're coming back together, and I know that some of the building that we're showing with the DUPLOs, it seems simplistic. You have to think about, you have a limited number of pieces, but remember, depending on the age level, you can use more complicated building material to give them more autonomy about maybe more details they want to put in their build. And this is different from coloring because coloring is very 2D. And what we're really thinking about is that spatial ability and the ways that children can move out of a 2D world that's flat, like a coloring book, into a 3D world and think about their spatial abilities in that realm. So we're just going to review a little bit of the stories we've covered. We've covered using the stories that we find on the bookshelf or in our digital library. Can we use those stories to reflect and build from? And the second thing we talked about is, can we use our stories? Can we use our stories that we live, or maybe the stories that are lived by the people around us and they share with us? And Bev's going to share with us another way that we can use stories. Sometimes you don't start with the story. So Bev.
All right. So Ames noticed when they were with some preschoolers that kids love to build towers, just lots and lots of towers of bricks. So they made these build cards, which are available on our website. When you take the build cards, you can use these handy little paper clip. Wait, they're not paper clips. Whatever those paper things are. I can't remember the name of them. Binder clips. There we go. Binder clips. Thank you. You can use the binder clips so that they just stand up for you. So then the kids can build the towers right in front of them. And so it's a really fun building thing. So this is a picture of a house and a tree. And so maybe the kids are able to tell you something. Where have you, tell me a story about what's happening at the house and the tree. So they get, there's some kids that just love to make up stories. And so these build cards can kind of be that catalyst for the story. So there's lots of different ones that we have. But the build cards are just another way where maybe you start by building towers, or, you have a kid that loves to build super tall towers. Well, let's grab a build card and let's build the towers for that. And then you start asking them questions about what might happen. Let's tell a story about this card. So that and the topic that comes from that is really equality, because I'm going to move to my camera so you can see my hands. So here I have the build card that's a slide. And so there's a certain number of slots here, and a child is working towards just building those slots. And so they're wanting to make an equal Lego tower to the picture on the tower. And so there's so many really great opportunities for kids while they're doing this. I mean, they just might be really excited to build them. And if I was with a kid, obviously I'd be using the binder clips here, but that does not work well for our two-dimensional camera. So I'm just going to keep putting them on top of each other. But then, you can ask questions like, well, how many bricks do you have here? And kids could tell you, maybe counting how many they have, or how many more do you need? And they might not even know how many more that they need, but they might not realize that these white rectangles here are able to tell you that. And that's okay. It's just, you're asking those questions because it's helping you to kind of know what they notice. So the kids are able to build the towers. Maybe they want to do it next to it and it's kind of right in the middle. One of the things that often happens with kids is they have to realize, we kind of have to start in the same place. So we have to both start at the bottom as we're building up, or I guess we could always start at the top. But the key is, right, you can't be halfway through one of those lines in order for them to be equal.
Yeah, definitely. And you can notice all of these things that children are doing. Sometimes they're building flat like you are doing. I've seen some children do that, and then they stand it up, or that they're doing a lot of comparison. They're building and they're putting it down, and they're maybe either starting to guess and getting closer towards when you notice that there's 3 spaces left and they're not counting, but they know there's 3 more. Those are some really interesting points that I've seen children play with this. When they have to count space by space, or when they just can, what we call subitize, they see this 3 spaces and know that that's 3. And that's great dialogue to say, you said you only had three. How did you know? And you might just see how they figured that out. Did they count their mind? Did they say things like, I just know that that's three. That's three, and they might show you with their fingers. But you mentioned like not only getting to build that, but then leading to the story. So I wonder, Bev, do you have a story about slides as you're building there that comes to your mind that you remember about slides or maybe
Oh,
as a
definitely.
kid?
So this probably could not be a picture of me on a slide, because my favorite way to go on a slide was to go up the slide. As much as I know we always tell kids not to do that, that's not allowed. But I really love climbing. I love rock climbing. Not that I do it very much, but I was just at the lake with my kids and we were climbing up this rock and jumping off it. So like climbing up tended to be what I did on the slides, especially as a kid. But I also have some great memories with slides when it comes to when my children were young. Like there's this adrenaline rush that kids get when they go down the slide. You hear them yelling, wee, or whatever, that I think is just so fun, and energizing. So especially a slide this tall, like this is a pretty tall slide. And I know when I was a kid, I would always look for the tallest slide, and heights do not intimidate me. So I was always ready to climb to the top and slide down and then do it again and again and again. So I don't know if anyone out there has any fun slide stories, or just maybe playground stories. But that's some of the ones that I have when I was a kid or when my children were young.
So we put in the chat the link to download these build cards that are free to download. And also I wanted to mention that although these segments that you see here with Bev's picture are already segmented for a DUPLO block, there are some that are not segmented. So if you want to use those for wooden blocks you might have, or some other blocks that you might use to build towers, you can use the ones that are not segmented, and those still work, but you'll see children doing kind of the same thing, though you won't be able maybe to exactly tell how many are left until you build the card a few times. You'll still see children comparing, and then you can ask, like, how many do you think you need? How many more do you think you need to finish the tower, or other questions that we've mentioned here. But those ones without segments give a lot of leeway for still some questioning.
Right. And really the key is just allowing, these cards to kind of fit with the blocks to create a rich story environment. So, I mean, these cards are a great resource, with DUPLOs, or you can use, like Aileen described, the ones that don't have the lines. But the key is, like, let's not think in silos for things, but let's start integrating things and realize that kind of makes an even more powerful learning environment, because it draws different children with different maybe learning kind of even styles or interests together. So to me, that's one of the powerful things about these stories, and being able to take these build cards and be able to just even give us stories. Like another example here is they're sitting at the table, and you could ask a kid, well, when did you sit at the table last? Or when have you sat at a table? And maybe they think about the cafeteria, or maybe they think at their house, and then they're telling you a story about grandma and grandpa, or something else that's happening in their life. Well, can you think of something maybe you could build related to that story? So they just become catalysts for really creativity. So here's an example of the ones that don't have the line in them, so that people kind of get an idea.
That's great. We had another build card, I think that's kind of newer, that we were going to show. It doesn't have a tower, but it does lend to some comparison and maybe some patterns that they might see.
Yeah, so let me put this under my camera here. So one of the things Aileen and I talked about was this idea that even in, like, so this came from our the session we did with Goldilocks and the Three Little Bears, hence the 3 beds that Goldilocks might have slept in. But they're different sizes. And you can see that there's kind of this pattern that's being followed in the beds. Well, that might not be obvious for the kids, but that's the kind of thing that we want to see if kids are able to notice. And maybe say, what would be the next bed that you would build? And then even being able to draw their attention to the different elements of the beds. So you might even be like, well, and this is an interesting one, right? If we have a bunch of single blocks here to build this bed, because that's what visually it looks like, they're not connected. So it really even becomes an opportunity to do a little, well, let's trade out these two for one of these if we want them connected.
Right.
But if you're building on top of the card, maybe that doesn't matter. I think when I printed this, it didn't print the DUPLO size. So you can see they're not quite fitting right. So, but that's another kind of example where, you know, maybe it's not even a card, but you just build a type of stairs or something, and you're just seeing if kids are noticing those patterns as well.
Absolutely. All right, so we have a card that we would like you to build with us, a few towers, and we'll just take a really quick play break this time. But in this slide, we're going to introduce you to like a skyline where some of those towers are missing, some of those buildings are missing. And think about, this is especially for our teachers, is thinking about the questions you can ask while building with the child. If you were working on this particular build card, what kind of questions might you ask as they build or as you build side by side? I think that that's great to think about before we do these kinds of activities. And we did these activities in small groups. We had like an independent station where kids could come and just play with these independently. So there's lots of ways to use it, but the questioning are so important. So we'll just take a few minutes for you to explore this card and build. And please feel free to share some of the questions you think of in our chat. All right, we're going to come back together and just kind of debrief this session that we had today, some of the activities, and also think about, some resources that we still have to share with you on our website.
Yes, yes. So we're going to start by just going back through and talking about some of these big math concepts that we addressed with our building today and stories. So the first one was when I was making our flowers here. So the flowers was that example of counting and multiplicity, because as we're building multiples of something, it's repeated. Now, if this flower was taller or different, then it's not really multiplicity anymore, but it's that idea of making the same thing multiple times. And that's that spatial experience around that. So, and then if you remember, we built a table, and this table was an example of substitution when we talked about substituting the different DUPLOs out. But also we talked about how this could be an example where it connects back to our personal stories and we sequence events. So maybe you build multiple objects and then you sequence those objects. That could even be that spatial way for you to literally take those objects and kind of explain the order that you did them this morning. Maybe I could have made a toothbrush and a bed and a table. First I got out of bed, then I sat at the table and ate my breakfast, and then I brushed my teeth. But it's taking those objects and allowing them to kind of purposefully show their comprehension and their storytelling with them. And then last but not least, we had our slide building here. And we are building our towers, and we talked a little about equality, and comparison, and how they're comparing the tower to the paper and trying to make those equal. And that's that beginning of just sameness that really is an important concept, because so often kids think, equality is about, the answer comes next, and it's so far from that. And really, we're able to teach them that in some playful ways and do STEAM concepts.
Yeah, thank you, Bev. And we'll shift a little bit to just as adults or teachers and the things that we wanted to highlight today. One of those was the questions, and it had to do with the guided play aspect. And I just wanted to share a question that was in the chat that they might ask. From the slide that we just went through in our play break, Sandra put, I wonder about the size of the buildings. Is one taller than the other? So that's a great question to ask children when they're building those towers in the buildings, seeing if they see one as larger than the other. And then maybe a follow-up question is, how many blocks larger? How many blocks bigger is it? Yeah, that's a great question.
Well, I even like that, because when you're in buildings, even in just outdoor space, let's say you're going for a walk, like buildings are different heights. I don't know that kids always pay attention to that. And so maybe as they're building that cityscape where they're looking at different heights of building, that starts in a Lego play experience, and it helps them to maybe become aware of something like that in their everyday life as well.
Definitely. And the second thing we talked about was noticing. So what are we noticing? Where are we taking advantage of the playtime as a place to notice what children can do? And that when they're relaxed, just like us, when we're relaxed, sometimes we are able to think more clearly, to think more precisely. And I think children are the same. And so watching them in informal spaces is so important. And then finally, the STEAM concepts. And so we really talked about spatial play, because as they're building and they're doing these 3D models that they're building from their head, visualizing, and then trying to replicate it in a way that looks like what they imagine, and then explaining that to an adult, like, this is what I built, this is what it means to me, maybe a story around it, some kind of connection they're making to it. All of that spatial play is so important and so vital. And we want to make sure that the girls as well as the boys are playing with the blocks and they're getting that building, that 3D building experience.
Right. And you guys can see on the top, we put adults are important. That's connecting back to that principle that the adult interaction that kids are having during those guided play moments are so vital. Like, kids need us to help build those STEM concepts and those STEAM concepts for them to be able to notice. So recognize how important that is as you're just coming along and noticing what kids are doing and asking them questions and collecting that information about what they do know, so that you can help them kind of take that next step in their learning journey. That can be so powerful, and just realizing those moments are happening all the time. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything. Certainly, Aileen and I have not exhausted the ideas around collecting data or guided play or the STEAM that you're noticing. Feel free to throw that in the chat as well as we're closing things up.
Yeah, and thank you for spending your time with us. We know that it's a busy time as people are coming back from vacation, getting ready to go to school. And so we really appreciate your time. The resources that we wanted to share today are the one pager for the stories for bricks with bricks. Gives kind of a snapshot of all our session today. And like it was said in the chat and shared, these are recorded for you to view later. So if you missed the beginning or had to leave early, you can revisit us, our webpage, and see some of this resources, even from the previous Hands Online. And so today we have both the building cards and the one pager that kind of gives you a summary of today. Also record some of the questions and things to notice. And so really want to put that out there so that you can share that with others, and also put it in use this year.
Right.
And before I announce next time, I wanted to thank Bev. It's been a privilege to work with her on this session that we've been able to kind of create together. We hope that there's other people that are going to use it and share on social media or through email the ways that you're using this.
Yeah, definitely.
So our next Hands Online is coming up next month. What Do You Hear? September 14th at 3:30. Please make sure that you register so you'll get a reminder, you won't forget, and you'll also get some information about the materials we'll be using, because always part of our sessions are about hands-on play together, side by side, and so we hope that you're being able to engage with us again. So thank you again from the Ames Center. There's our contact information. We hope to see you in some way in the future, and everyone be well and stay safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye.